The Komati River runs through Komati like a vein of silver, carrying the memories of those who swim in its waters. Vusi and Londi were children of that river, born in neighboring homesteads where the land kissed both Mozambique and Swaziland, where the earth was so fertile that sugarcane grew tall enough to hide secrets. They were 7 years old when they first jumped from the rocks into the deep pool where the river curved. Londi had hesitated at the edge, her small feet gripping the stone, and Vusi had taken her hand. Together, he had said, and they had leaped, their laughter swallowed by the splash, their friendship sealed in that moment of shared bravery. The years that followed were woven with the golden threads of childhood promise. They walked to school together, 6 kilometers each way, their uniforms dusty by the time they arrived. They studied under the same mango tree, sharing textbooks because neither family could afford two of everything. When Vusi's father, the school principal, praised Londi's essays in assembly, Vusi beamed as if the achievement were his own. When Londi's mother fell ill during the drought year, Vusi's family shared their maize meal without hesitation. By the time they reached high school, everyone in Komati knew Vusi and Londi were meant for each other. It was not spoken of loudly, these things really were, but it was understood. The way Vusi waited for Londi after her extra mathematics lessons. The way Londi saved her lunch to share with Vusi when his father's salary came late. The way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching, as if they were reading a story only they could see. Their acceptance letters to the University of Mpumalanga arrived on the same day. Both had been admitted to study law. Londi's mother wept with joy, Vusi's father slaughtered a goat. The village elders nodded knowingly, these two would make something of themselves, and they would do it together. The University of Mpumalanga sprawled across a hillside in Nelspruit, modern buildings of glass and steel that seemed to mock the modest homesteads of Nomotsi. In their first year, Vusi and Londi clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. They studied in the library until closing time, quizzing each other on constitutional law and legal precedents. They cooked fap and tomato gravy in the communal kitchen, their meal simple but shared. They were each other's compass in this new world. Londi blossomed slowly, like a flower opening to the sun. Her professors noticed her analytical mind, the way she could take a complex case and distill it to its essential truth. She asked questions that made the lecture halls go quiet. She wrote papers that other students whispered about in admiration. But Londi remained unaware of her own brilliance, still seeing herself as the girl from Komati who had walked 6 kilometers to school. Vusi noticed everything. He noticed how Professor Kumalo lingered after class to discuss Londi's insights. He noticed how the other students sought her out for study groups. He noticed, and at first, he was proud. This was his Londi, the girl he had known since they were children, finally being seen for the gem she was. But then he began to notice other things. The university was a mirror that reflected every inequality of the nation. There were students who arrived in cars that cost more than his father earned in 5 years. Girls who changed handbags like the seasons, boys who spoke English with the lazy confidence of those who had never had to prove themselves. They gathered in clusters, laughing about holidays in Cape Town and Dubai, complaining about the wine selection at campus restaurants that Vusi and Londi could not afford to enter. At first, Vusi felt nothing but disdain for them. They were soft, privileged, disconnected from real life. But as the months passed, his disdain began to curdle into something darker. It happened in small moments, when a group of them talked about their parents' law firms over coffee while Vusi pretended to study nearby, when a boy named Veli arrived in a new BMW and girls swarmed around it like bees to honey, when Bianca Koza mentioned casually that her father was considering buying a second property in Santan, as if homes were things you collected like stamps. Vusi began to lie awake at night in his small dorm room, staring at the ceiling, calculating. His father was a school principal, respected, yes, but poor by any urban standard. His mother sold fat cook on weekends to supplement the family income. They were better off than many in Komati, but here, they were nothing. He was nothing. The realization hit him like a fever, burning through his veins, reshaping him from the inside out. Londi noticed the change but could not name it. Vusi became quieter, more intense. He studied with a ferocity that went beyond dedication into something that looked almost like rage. When she asked if he was all right, he would smile, that same smile from their childhood, and tell her he was fine, just focused on their future. She believed him because she had always believed him. By their second year, both Vusi and Londi were at the top of their class. They maintained a friendly competition, pushing each other to excel, celebrating each other's victories. Londi studied because she loved the law, loved the idea that society had created systems to protect the vulnerable and deliver justice. She dreamed of going back to Komati one day, of opening a practice that would serve her community. Vusi studied because he had discovered ambition, and ambition had discovered him. He learned the law not to serve it but to master it, to use it as a ladder to climb out of the poverty that suddenly felt like a prison. He never shared this with Londi. Their conversations still revolved around their shared dreams, dreams that now seemed quaint and small to him, though he would never say so. They finished their third year ranked first and second. Then came the summer that changed everything. The phone call came in the middle of the night, as bad news always does. Vusi's father had collapsed at his desk while preparing the next term's schedule. By the time they got him to the hospital in Nelspruit, he was gone. Londi held Vusi as he wept. She traveled with him back to Komati, stood beside him at the funeral, helped his mother receive the endless stream of mourners. She watched him carry his father's coffin with his brothers, saw him throw the first handful of earth onto the grave. She felt his grief as if it were her own because in many ways it was. She had loved Vusi's father too. What Londi did not see was the small, ugly part of Vusi's heart that flickered with something other than sorrow when the lawyers came to read the will. Vusi's father had been a careful man, a planner. Years ago, quietly, he had taken out 2 life insurance policies, one for each of his wives. It was his way of ensuring that when he was gone, there would be no fighting, no inequality between his families. The payout for Vusi's mother was 12 million rands. 12 million. The number seemed impossible. Vusi's mother wept when they told her, but Vusi felt something else. A door had opened, and on the other side was everything he had been burning for. He hid his excitement during the mourning period. It would have been unseemly, disrespectful to his father's memory. But in the quiet moments, alone in his childhood bedroom, Vusi planned. He would buy a car, not just any car, but the kind that would make people turn and look. He would upgrade everything, his clothes, his phone, his entire presentation. He would finally be able to stand beside those rich students not as a supplicant but as an equal. When he returned to campus for the second and final semester of their 4th year, Londi immediately noticed something different. There was a hardness in Vusi's eyes that had not been there before, a distance that confused her. "Are you okay?" she asked him one evening as they sat in the library. "Really okay?" "I'm fine, Londi," he said, not looking up from his textbook. "Just trying to focus. We have a lot of work this year." It was the first time he had lied to her so directly. Within 2 weeks, Vusi had his driver's license. Within a month, he had purchased a BMW 3 Series, silver with leather seats. It was not the most expensive car on campus, but it was enough. Enough to be noticed. Enough to be invited. When Londi saw it, she was genuinely happy for him. "Vusi, this is wonderful. Your father would be so proud. You can drive us to Johannesburg and Durban on weekends now, maybe even home sometimes." But Vusi did not take Londi outside of Nelspruit. He did not take her anywhere. Instead, he began spending time with people Londi barely knew. Veli with his careless money. Bianca with her perfect hair and designer everything. Sipo, whose father owned a chain of hotels. They welcomed Vusi because money recognized money, and suddenly Vusi had money. Londi told herself it was grief. She told herself Vusi needed space to process his father's death, that he was coping in his own way. She focused on her studies, throwing herself into her coursework with the same dedication she had always had. Their final semester was grueling, and Londi barely saw Vusi outside of classes. When she did see him, he was always surrounded by his new friends, laughing at jokes she did not understand, making plans she was not part of. Once, she walked past a campus coffee shop and saw him sitting with Bianca, their heads close together, Bianca's hand on his arm. The sight made Londi's stomach clench, but she pushed the feeling down. They had been friends since childhood. They had loved each other since before they knew what love meant. This was just a phase. After graduation, things would return to normal. Then came the final exams. Londi studied alone in the library, her notes spread around her like a fortress. She texted Vusi, asking if he wanted to study together like they always had. He replied hours later, busy. Good luck. For 3 weeks, as they wrote exam after exam, Londi did not see or hear from Vusi. It was the longest they had gone without speaking since they were 7 years old. When the exams ended, Londi felt hollowed out, exhausted not just from the academic pressure but from the ache of Vusi's absence. She returned to her dorm to find a text from him, going to Richards Bay to visit relatives. Need a break. Talk when I get back. Londi went home to Komati, her heart heavy with something she could not quite name. She helped her mother in the garden, visited with neighbors, tried to lose herself in the familiar rhythms of village life. Then she opened Instagram. There was Vusi, not in Richards Bay but in Cape Town. Camps Bay, to be specific, the beach sparkling behind him. He was surrounded by his new friends, Bianca tucked under his arm, both of them wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than Londi's entire wardrobe. The caption read, "Living the life." #blessed, #new beginnings. Londi stared at the photo until her eyes burned. She called him. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice distant, annoyed. Vusi, I thought you were in Richards Bay. Plans changed. Look, Londi, I'm busy. I'll call you later. Vusi, what's happening? What's going on with us? There was a long pause. Then, maybe there is no us anymore, Londi. People change. People grow. Maybe we've grown in different directions. He hung up before she could respond. Londi sat in her mother's garden as the sun set, the Komati River visible in the distance, and felt something inside her break. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet devastation of a foundation cracking. The results were released in January. Londi had finished first in their class. Vusi had finished second. But it was not the rankings that destroyed her. It was what came next. Every year, Mathebula Incorporated, the most prestigious law firm in the province, held a competition for graduating law students. The winners would be offered articles at the firm, a guaranteed path to success, to becoming an attorney, to building a career. Londi and Vusi had always planned to apply together. They had even worked on their submission together, a detailed case study on land rights that Londi had poured her soul into. When the results were announced in February, 2 names were called, Vusi Ngwenya and Bianca Koza. Londi's name was nowhere on the list. She called the firm, certain there had been a mistake. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm, only 2 positions were available, and they had been filled. But I worked on that case study with Vusi, Londi said, her voice cracking. My name should have been on the submission. I'm sorry, the receptionist said. The submission we received was from Vusi Ngwenya and Bianca Naidu. There was no mention of a third contributor. Londi hung up and sat very still. Then she opened her laptop and found the original case study files. Her name had been on every draft. She had done 70% of the research. She had written the entire legal analysis section. Vusi had simply replaced her name with Bianca's. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that Londi could barely comprehend it. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was theft. This was erasure. This was Vusi looking at everything there had been, everything they had shared, and deciding it was worth nothing compared to what he could gain. Londi did not cry. She was beyond tears. Instead, she felt a cold clarity settle over her like frost. At 23 years of age she had no plan B. Every other firm had already filled their article positions. She had not applied elsewhere because she had trusted Vusi. She had believed in their future together. With no options left, Londi returned to Komati. She went to the chief's office and offered to work for free, anything to gain experience, to not lose the momentum of her education. Chief Sibiko was an elderly man, worn down by years of fighting battles he could not win. He agreed to let her help with administrative work. "There's no money," he warned her. "The tribal authority barely has enough to keep the lights on." "I don't need money right now," Londi said. "I just need to learn." What she did not say was that she had nowhere else to go. For 3 months, Londi filed papers, answered phones, and tried to make herself useful. She lived with her mother and walked to the chief's office every morning, just as she had walked to school as a child. The other young people in the village looked at her with pity. She had gone to university and come back with nothing to show for it. Then one afternoon, while organizing the chief's chaotic filing system, Londi found a file marked Land Claim, Costa Holdings vs. Komati Traditional Authority. She opened it out of curiosity and found herself reading for 3 hours straight. 15 years ago, a massive banana plantation company called Costa Holdings had approached the chief about leasing communal land. The community had agreed to a 20-year lease, believing they would receive rental income and employment opportunities. But over the years, Costa had gradually expanded beyond the agreed boundaries, swallowing up more and more communal land, and stopped paying what was due to the community. When the chief tried to object, Costa's lawyers had produced documents claiming the land had been sold outright, not leased. The community had hired a lawyer to fight back, but Costa's legal team, from a Johannesburg firm with unlimited resources, had buried them in motions and counter-motions until the community could no longer afford to continue. The case had been abandoned 7 years ago. Londi read through every document twice. Then she went to find the chief. "Why did you stop fighting?" she asked him. Chief Sibiko looked at her with tired eyes. "Child, we had no money and no hope. Their lawyers made ours look like schoolchildren. They had experts, they had documents we couldn't verify, they had everything. We had nothing but our word, and the courts don't care about the word of poor people. What if I told you I think their documents are fraudulent?" Londi said. "What if I told you I think we can reopen this case?" The chief laughed, but it was a sad sound. "You're a child with no articles, no license to practice. How would you do anything? I can research. I can prepare. I can find someone to front the case until I have my license. Chief, if we win this, the land comes back to the community. You could create jobs, build houses, change everything for 40,000 people. Isn't that worth trying?" Something in her voice, determination, perhaps, or the fearlessness of someone who had already lost everything, made the chief reconsider. "My son Duma will think I'm crazy for agreeing to this," he said. "But fine. I'll pay you a small salary to work on it. Don't make me regret this." Londi got to work. Duma Sibiko was 32 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with his father's thoughtful eyes and his late mother's gentle smile. He had studied environmental science in Pretoria but had returned home when his mother fell ill. She had passed away 3 years ago, and Duma had stayed, helping his father manage the traditional authority while working as a consultant for local conservation projects. He was also deeply skeptical of Londi. "Baba, no disrespect to the girl, but she's setting us up for humiliation," Duma said when his father told him about the plan. "Do you remember what happened last time? Costa's lawyers destroyed us. And now you want to try again with someone who doesn't even have her articles." "She has something the other lawyer didn't have," the chief replied. "She has hunger. And sometimes hunger is stronger than experience." Duma encountered Londi in the office a few days later. She was surrounded by papers, her hair tied back, pen between her teeth as she cross-referenced documents. She looked up when he entered, and their eyes met. "You must be the chief's son," Londi said. "He mentioned you're not exactly enthusiastic about this case." "I'm not enthusiastic about false hope," Duma replied. "These people have suffered enough without being dragged through another losing battle." Londi stood up, and despite being a foot shorter than Duma, she met his gaze without flinching. "Then help me make sure we don't lose." Over the following months, something unexpected happened. Duma began spending time in the office, initially to monitor what Londi was doing, to make sure she wasn't wasting the community's resources. But he found himself drawn in by her work, by the meticulous way she built her case piece by piece. She had found inconsistencies in Costa's land documents, dates that didn't align, signatures that looked forged, boundary descriptions that contradicted official surveys. She had tracked down elderly community members who remembered the original negotiations and were willing to testify. She had reached out to environmental groups who had evidence of Costa exceeding their environmental permits. Environmental permits. "How did you find all this?" Duma asked one evening as they worked late. "I looked where no one else bothered to look," Londi replied. "Rich lawyers don't dig through dusty municipal archives. They don't sit with gogos for hours listening to stories. They don't believe that poor people keep records too." Duma smiled. "You sound angry." "I am angry," Londi said quietly. "I'm angry at systems that protect the powerful. I'm angry at people who think money can erase truth. I'm angry at being underestimated." "Is that why you're doing this?" "Anger?" Londi was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Someone I trusted took everything from me. He made me feel worthless. This case is my way of proving, to him, to everyone, to myself, that I'm not." Duma saw her then, truly saw her, not just the brilliant legal mind but the wounded person underneath, fighting not just for the community but for her own redemption. "You're not worthless," he said softly. "You're extraordinary." Londi looked up, surprised. Their eyes held, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps. An understanding that they were both people shaped by loss, by duty, by the need to prove themselves. After that night, they worked together differently. Duma contributed his environmental expertise, helped Londi understand the ecological impact of Costa's overfarming. He drove her to meetings, helped her interview witnesses, became her partner in a way that was both professional and something more. Londi found herself looking forward to seeing him each morning. She noticed the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered. She noticed how he made her laugh even when she was exhausted, how he brought her food when she forgot to eat, how he believed in her even when she doubted herself. One evening, 12 months into the case preparation, they were driving back from a village meeting. The sun was setting over the hills, painting everything gold. Duma pulled over at a spot overlooking the Komati River. "Why here?" Londi asked. "I used to come here with my mother," Duma said. "When things got hard, she would say that rivers remember everything. All the joy, all the sorrow. But they keep flowing anyway. She taught me that survival isn't about forgetting pain, it's about flowing past it. Londi felt tears prick her eyes. She had been holding so much pain for so long, Vusi's betrayal, her derailed career, her sense of lost future. But sitting here with Duma, watching the river catch the last light, she felt something shift inside her. I swam in this river as a child, she said. With someone who promised we'd always jump together. He was a fool to let you go, Duma said. But maybe some people come into our lives just to teach us what we don't want. So we recognize the right person when they appear. He took her hand. Londi looked at their joined fingers and felt something she had not felt in over a year, hope. Duma, she whispered. Yes. Thank you for seeing me. He squeezed her hand. Thank you for letting me. That night marked a new beginning. Their relationship deepened slowly, carefully, both of them scarred by past losses and unwilling to rush. But there was a rightness to it, a sense of two people who had found each other at exactly the moment they both needed finding. After 24 months of preparation, Londi was ready. She had found a retired attorney, Mr. Mabeso, who agreed to front the case while she worked behind the scenes. In January, they filed a motion to reopen the land claim against Makoba Holdings. The response was immediate and vicious. Costa hired Mathebula Incorporated, the most powerful firm in the province, to handle their defense. And Mathebula Incorporated, in turn, reached out to their newest junior associate for inside information, Vusi Ngwenya. Vusi had not had the career trajectory he had imagined. Despite working at Mathebula Incorporated for 3 years, he had never distinguished himself. He did the minimum, coasting on his charm and connections rather than doing the hard work. When his articles were completed, the firm offered him a junior position but made it clear there was no partnership in his future. He lacked the dedication, the insight, the hunger that made great lawyers. Bianca, his girlfriend, had moved on to her father's company. The relationship had run its course. They were two people brought together by proximity and privilege rather than any real connection. Vusi now lived in a nice apartment in Nelspruit, drove his BMW, went to the right parties, but felt increasingly hollow. Then he heard about the Komati land case. His old home. The community he had grown up in. And somewhere in his chest, a small voice whispered, Londi. When the senior partners at Mathebula Incorporated called him in to discuss the case, Vusi saw an opportunity. If he could help them win this case against his own community, he could prove his value to the firm. He could finally secure the permanent senior position he craved. I know Komati better than anyone, Vusi told the partners. I can go back, reconnect with the chief, find out what their strategy is. I can be your inside man. The partners agreed. 2 weeks later, Vusi drove back to Komati. He visited the chief, bringing expensive whiskey and talk of wanting to help his home community. He presented himself as someone conflicted about working for a big firm, someone who wanted to use his inside position to help the village. Chief Sibiko was wary, but Duma was immediately suspicious. Baba, this is a trap. Everyone knows Vusi Ngwenya abandoned this place. Why would he suddenly care now? We should hear him out, the chief said. Maybe he's genuine. They arranged a meeting at the tribal office. When Vusi walked into the boardroom, he froze. There, at the head of the table, sat Londi. She looked different. Her hair was styled, her bearing confident. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were cold, assessing, utterly devoid of the warmth he remembered. Vusi, she said evenly. How unexpected. Londi. I didn't know you were working on this case. There's a lot you don't know about me anymore. The meeting was tense. Vusi presented his offer, claiming to have inside information about Mathebula Incorporated's strategy. He shared a few details, small, insignificant things that sounded important to those who didn't know better. Londi listened quietly. When he finished, she thanked him politely and said the team would consider his offer. After he left, Duma turned to Londi. "That was a lie," Londi finished. "Everything he said was information we could have gotten ourselves. He's not here to help us. He's here to spy on us. So what do we do?" Londi smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "We feed him exactly what we want Mathebula Incorporated to believe." Over the next 6 months, they gave Vusi carefully crafted misinformation. They let him think their case was weak, that they were relying primarily on emotional testimony rather than hard evidence. They made him believe they had not found the documentary proof they actually had. Vusi reported everything back to his firm, confident he was securing his future. He had no idea Londi was playing chess while he was playing checkers. The case began in Bombila High Court on a Monday morning in March. Londi arrived with Mr. Mabeso, Duma, and a team of community members. Across the aisle sat Mathebula Incorporated's senior partners and their associates, including Vusi. When their eyes met, Vusi felt something twist in his chest. Londi looked regal, untouchable. Beside her sat Duma, protective and attentive in a way that made Vusi realize they were together. Londi had moved on. She had found someone else. The realization stung more than Vusi wanted to admit. The trial lasted 6 months. Mathebula Incorporated brought expert witnesses, economic analysts, reams of documentation. They argued that Costa Holdings had legally purchased the land, that the community had received fair compensation, that reopening the case was frivolous. Then Londi presented her evidence. She had original survey maps that contradicted Costa's boundary claims. She had testimony from elders who described the lease negotiations. She had environmental reports showing Costa had exceeded their permits and caused ecological damage worth millions. Most devastatingly, she had a forensic document analyst who testified that 3 key signatures on the sale documents had been forged. The courtroom went silent. Mathebula Incorporated scrambled, but Londi had built her case too well. Every argument they made, she countered. Every witness they brought, she discredited. She was brilliant, precise, devastating. Vusi watched from his seat, a mix of emotions churning inside him. Pride, that was his Londi, the girl he had known since childhood, now commanding a courtroom. Regret, he had thrown this away, had betrayed her for money and status that suddenly felt meaningless. And envy, bitter, toxic envy that she had surpassed him so completely. The judge delivered a preliminary ruling, the case had merit and would continue. Costa would have to prove their ownership definitively, and they would face penalties for the environmental damage. It was a massive victory for Londi. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her. "Ms. Goba, how does it feel to take on one of the biggest corporations in the province? What's next for you? Will you continue representing rural communities?" Londi answered with grace and confidence. Duma stood beside her, his hand on her back, and when she looked at him, her face transformed with a joy that made Vusi want to look away. That night, as the community celebrated, Vusi sat alone in his apartment and confronted a truth he had been avoiding. He had destroyed the best thing in his life for a dream that had turned out to be a mirage. The appeal hearing took place 6 months later. This time, Mathebula Incorporated brought in a senior counsel from Johannesburg, one of the most feared advocates in the country. They argued aggressively, technically, brilliantly. But Londi had grown too. She had spent the 6 months studying appeal court precedents, refining her arguments, preparing for every possible attack. She stood before the 5 justices and argued with a clarity and passion that reminded everyone in the room why the law existed, not to protect the powerful, but to deliver justice to those who had none. The justices ruled in her favor. Moreover, they issued a scathing critique of Costa Holdings' conduct and ordered them to pay punitive damages to the community. The victory was complete. But there was one more twist. As the case concluded, internal investigators at Mathebula Incorporated discovered that Vusi had been leaking strategy to Londi, or so they believed. In reality, Londi had played him so perfectly that his reports had actually damaged the firm's case. They had prepared for arguments she never made and missed defenses she actually used. Vusi was fired in disgrace. His reputation in legal circles was destroyed. No other firm would hire him. Meanwhile, Londi's phone would not stop ringing. Law firms in Johannesburg and Cape Town wanted to work with her. Communities with similar issues secured her services. Legal academics invited her to lecture. She had become, almost overnight, one of the most sought-after land rights attorneys in the country. But the most profound moment came 2 months after the final ruling. Chief Sibiko called a community meeting. 40,000 people gathered in the tribal grounds. The chief stood before them, elderly but standing straight, and announced that the land had been returned. Costa Holdings had vacated, and the community now controlled 150,000 hectares of prime agricultural land. Then he made an announcement that shocked everyone: this victory belongs to one person. Londi Goba worked without pay, without recognition, without certainty. She fought for us when no one else would. Therefore, the Tribal Council has voted unanimously: Londi Goba will receive 5% equity in the business of the Land Trust. She will be a partner in our future, as she has been a champion of our past. 5% of 150,000 hectares, managed through a profitable agricultural cooperative, made Londi an instant millionaire. But more than the money, it was the moment when Chief Sibiko embraced her, when 40,000 people cheered her name, when Duma lifted her off her feet and spun her around, that Londi felt the last piece of her broken heart heal. 3 months later, Londi and Duma sat by the Komati River at sunset. She was now 30 years old, a millionaire, a sought-after attorney, and engaged to the man she loved. "Do you ever think about him?" Duma asked quietly. "About Vusi?" Londi was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. Not with anger anymore. Just sadness for what he could have been. For what we could have been if he hadn't chosen money over his soul." "Do you think he regrets it?" "I know he does. But regret doesn't undo the past. It just teaches you what not to do in the future." "You're wiser than your years," Duma said, kissing her temple. "I had a good teacher," Londi replied, leaning into him. "You taught me that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about flowing past the pain." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the river catch the dying light. Londi thought about the little girl she had been, jumping into the same water with a boy who had promised to always hold her hand. She thought about the woman she had become, stronger for having lost him and found herself. "Ready?" Duma asked, standing and extending his hand. "For what?" He smiled. "To jump." Londi laughed and took his hand. Together, they ran to the rocks and leaped into the deep pool, their laughter echoing across the water, their future bright with promise. The river remembered everything, the promises made and broken, the love given and betrayed, the girl who had become a woman. But the river also knew that water never stops flowing, that endings are just new begin.